Thank you, and thanks for having us. As you will see, today we're speaking about a very dangerous process that is going on at EU level, and namely what we call the automation of Fortress Europe, which basically is the construction of a technological fortress at the borders, at the external borders of the EU, and even beyond that, as we'll see later with Antonella, with the purpose to somehow solve migration, as if it was some kind of, technological issue, some kind of engineering problem. And, what we'll do here is to try and put a spot on this. What I will do is try and see, for example, how this fortress came into being and how it is developing. It is interesting how it came into being. It came as a consequence, basically, of what we all love, the Schengen Agreement, which has a dark side, unfortunately, which is in order to dissolve the internal borders, apparently you needed to build a well-manned fortress on its outside borders. And these borders, of course, given that automation and AI are all the rage, are increasingly becoming automated as well. They call them smart borders. So where is this going? And basically it is building on something that already exists. So it is not completely new. It would be wrong to say that. We already have forms of automation that regulate the migration procedures, that regulate the surveillance at the external borders. We see a lot of automated surveillance assemblages, for example, done with drones, thermal cameras, surveillance towers, a lot of these multiple sensors as well. You have the automated fingerprinting and risk profiling, and increasingly we will see also automated face recognition technology in the EU IT large-scale databases that basically collect information on migration. You have it at national level as well. For example, in the camps in Greece, the migration camps in Greece, you have all of these AI-based behavior controlling, movement controlling technologies inside the camps, which is going to be soon expanded to all 36 camps in Greece. And we also have many other forms that are applied. For example, in Germany, we have automated dialect recognition to recognize automatically whether a migrant is actually where he comes from, where he says he comes from. But of course, this is just part of the story, and what we try to do with this automation on the Move project that I'm leading is basically trying to understand the vision behind all of this and trying to see where this is going. And to understand that, I think one of the ways in which you can do that is to try and understand how the EU is funding projects to develop further technologies to further control and surveil migrants. So you have all of these names, like these very dystopian names, like these I-border control, I-Seymour, IT flows, all these names that somehow encapsulate this idea that is really reminding me of something that Snowden revealed, actually, like the NSA motto, collect it all, know it all, process it all, and exploit it all, which is referred to the intelligence world, of course, and it has to do with terrorism. But of course, we know that the EU has been conceiving migration as a security problem, as a national security issue in particular, and so it doesn't really, it comes as no surprise that, of course, these technologies are basically developed under this idea of having to know and register everything. In the end, what you come up with is some kind of totalizing gaze, some kind of, it has been called many things in many ways, of course, but one way would be to say a perfectly panoptic society, it has been called. And you have confirmation, actually, from a recent interview, for example, from the Deputy Director of Frontex, Yuku Sarekano, who says, what comes next is a very serious discussion on automation. We're looking into how, in the next 5 to 10 years, we can have more automated border crossing and a more seamless travel experience. So in the end, we have, during this project, we found out, for example, that these EU projects, which are basically research projects, are no speculative endeavor. They have many concrete applications. They're, of course, buried into the deliverables they don't usually share. But if you actually read through them, you see that these technologies are in part already applied, or they are meant to be applicable or commercialized even. So they are of course, developed with no speculative end, let's say. Of course, another problem that we have is when you want to actually understand what's going on in this future, building of this very, very current future, actually, building of the technology, of the technological fortress, is that these documents are not given to you in full, of course. So you need to somehow make your way through a lot of redactions, censorship. In a document we have like 170 pages that were redacted all in a row. You don't really know what's going on there. You don't even know what they're talking about. So this opacity is systemic, and it's no exception to the algorithmic world, I would say. But it's all the more concerning given that it relates to very vulnerable individuals. And then the EU could say, well, but of course we do that, but we care about human rights. With the EU, after all, we have human values, we have laws for AI and everything. And of course, this is all related, for example, to the AI Act, but also to the ethics assessment that these projects should be going through. But when you try and read through them, again, you don't read much about them because there's not much to see there. But even if you do, and when you do, you see that these assessments are really shallow many times, not every time, but most of the time they don't really ask foundational questions. They don't ask, is it a good idea, for example, to develop some kind of emotion recognition lie detector at the borders of the EU, to decide with a virtual agent, with a motion recognition technology, whether a migrant is telling the truth or not, when he says, "Oh yeah, I'm a refugee, I'm seeking asylum, I'm escaping from a dangerous situation." Do you want an algorithm to assess that? And of course, they would say, "Oh no, it's not just an algorithm. There's always be a human. There's always going to be a human in the loop and everything." But we know, that there is a thing called automation bias, which leads to, believing that the algorithms are much more objective. So we have a lot of building blocks, and we want to leave some 10 minutes for questions, of course. So I'm going to be ending soon to pass the microphone to Antonella. But some of the building blocks of this automated fortress that we're finding, just to let you have a better grasp and a better idea, you can find all of this information in a text that we published on our website on algorithmwatch.org. For example, you will have AI-based tools to predict and manage migration flows, which even foresee potential risks of tension between migrants and EU citizens. And of course, many times one can wonder, is this going to lead to even more efficient illegal pushbacks? Because of course, if you can predict the amount of people, their nationality, and we know, for example, with the Migration Pact and the latest legislation, the nationality actually matters, you will see that, this, of course, becomes very dangerous. You have even more sophisticated biometrics to realize this vision of like a seamless travel for some citizens, like for some individuals, like considered bona fide, considered, law-abiding citizens. They just have a smartphone. They won't be checking, they won't have any additional checks anymore, for example. They will just go walking through the airport, for example, to be let in another country or in the EU. And whereas for migrants, of course, they will be put into some kind of, I used to call it digital hell, because it's basically you don't really know what kind of database is influential for you, what kind of system is being used, what are the criteria, how is it done. But you end up in this situation, which is a very Kafkian situation, if you want to say. And then you have, of course, like the robots, basically, these swarms of robots that all work together in conjunction to patrol the borders. You have risk management, risk assessments, which again are automated, again with the video tracking to spot abnormal behavior. So you can see where this is going. You have this micro-expression things. Did you want to deduce from how a person reacts with micro-reaction in his face, how it is going, whether he's telling the truth or not? And interestingly, this was proposed by us, by civil society, by the Protect Not Surveil Coalition. We tried to get this banned. And of course, there was a carve-out and an exception in the end, because apparently the EU wants to it's millions of euros invested in funding, you know, over the years to actually come to fruition. So they want to be able to use emotion recognition, for example. So I will leave the conclusion to Antonella. I would just say that this is the wrong direction, of course, to go to solve migration. Migration is not a problem that can be solved. It's a human phenomenon. It shouldn't be portrayed as such. And of course, this buys into a much broader conversation, of course, of the data around migration, how scientifically we actually conceive of migration, which has a lot to do with other things rather than technology. But this doesn't solve migration. This doesn't really prevent death and abuse in the Mediterranean or in the desert, you know, and Antonella is going to say more about that. And it enables even predictive repression, for example, or increase the responsabilization, as we said, because you delegate increasing functions of very delicate functions to algorithms. And Antonella, over to you.
Thank you, Fabio. Thanks a lot for having us. You might have listened to Fabio's talk and think that this is a talk about technology. It is not. You might be mistaken because there is a lot of sophisticated or maybe not so sophisticated technology involved. This is a talk about money. This is a talk about politics and policies of violence and discrimination. This is also a talk about language. Because the language of technology, the technical language, is what is used to conceal the actual purpose, to describe the instruments. So we said language. Let's take a step back. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the language of migration issues, so I don't know how many of you have heard the expression border externalization, which is a term that is used by migration scholars, policy making, to basically extend the border and migration controls beyond the so-called migrant receiving nations, which we think European countries are the migrant receiving nation. It's not exactly like that. But basically, in the context of EU policies, the EU has been outsourcing, basically, borders to countries that are way south. So the border is effectively not the ones we think, the European Union borders. The borders extend to the Balkans, the border extends to Northern Africa, and then further beyond, further south. What happens? EU money is used to extend these border and migration controls, and over the decades, surveillance technology has become a central asset in these policies, with serious impacts on people's lives. As we said, this is enabled by funding, with names that we probably don't reveal that. So the EU Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, or the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. There are other funding instruments that are no longer in use that have the word peace in it. And very strangely, seems instead fund police forces. All of this is done with the purpose of curb migration. It comes in several forms. It comes in the forms of directly equipping and training foreign intelligence and security forces in countries in the MENA region, for instance. So the report that was mentioned earlier that I wrote last year for Euromed Rights goes deeper in that, but they by no means the only countries involved. It can take the shape of facilitating exports of surveillance equipment by industry, promoting legislation which enables surveillance. It can take the form of creating biometric identity systems, including providing equipment, training officials, influencing laws. This is all done with EU money in countries that don't have the same safeguards for their citizens. And when surveillance technologies are deployed with the purpose of anti-smuggling, again, the wording, trafficking, counterterrorism in countries where democracies are fragile or there are authoritarian governments, it's very easily, what's gonna very easily gonna happen is that they're gonna be used for the repression of people on the move, as well as of people living in those countries, creating further cycle of violence and instability. So what is being sold as tools to curb migration flows on projects that are called promoting development, dismantling networks of trafficking. These are systems of violence and control under the guise of fighting human trafficking in these countries. What is happening? Well, it's actually already just under like the eyes of everyone. Just last week, a group of about 50 journalists from all over the world, and published also here on Der Spiegel, as well as the Washington Post and many other countries, they found out that there are systematic policies of mass expulsion, like what they're called desert dumps, of black migrants that have been rounded up by the government of Tunisia, Morocco, Mauritania. They've been, and it's just not just migrants. These are also people that are maybe migrant workers that have established their lives in those countries. They're rounded up, they're basically kidnapped, and they're dumped in the desert. The police forces, the security forces that are doing this are funded with EU money. Like, these are projects, again, from the funding instruments that I mentioned earlier, but also bilateral agreement that we hear very often. We hear every now and then like a new bilateral agreement with Morocco, with Egypt, with Tunisia. And we also hear about how civil society, human rights defenders, journalists, activists have been surveilled, have been protests have been repressed violently. A month ago, another report looked at EU funding used in the context of Senegal, and those forces supposedly trained to prevent migration and to enhance stability, instead use those same tools and equipment to repress protests in the street. Again, this was published by Al Jazeera and other media. So the result of it is under everyone's like. But did the EU know or had concerns of how these EU-funded projects are implemented? Well, it sounds like they didn't do the proper assessment. So I'm now an independent researcher, but before that, I worked for a few years for an organization called Privacy International, which challenges surveillance practices from government and companies. And one of the things that we did at Privacy International 2 years ago with other organizations like Access Now, like Sea-Watch, the Border Violence Monitoring Network, Homo Digitalis, and the Federation for International Human Rights, was to file a complaint to the European Ombudsman precisely on the human rights impact assessment that had been performed before starting this EU-funded project. What the EU Ombudsman found out after a year of investigation, so the results came out about, I think, December 2023, was that the European Commission had not done their work. So had not performed like the human rights impact assessment, which are exactly what they sound like. So like an analysis that is human rights based and looks at the risk for human rights in the future. So it's something that would have prevented some of these technologies and other tools being deployed and being used potentially against people. This is something that the Commission didn't do. The Ombudsman suggested that the Commission should have done this from now on. But I think it's telling that the European Commission talks about, the right of citizens and the protection of citizens, and yet implemented something like project like the EU Emergency Trust Fund, which is like 5 billion euros. It's not a small feat. 5 billion euros provided largely by the European Union and some other countries, without systematic and formal assessment that could have prevented the deployment of these systems and could have actually protected the rights of people on the move as well as citizens of those countries. So to sort of go back to where we started, technology is a red herring. Don't get me wrong, it is a significant component of these systems. It enables them. We don't have the time for this, but it is a very good business for many actors involved, military, security, tech companies that sell tools, and they also sell narratives of security, of seamless borders, of solutions to problems that European institutions are very happy to take and use in their politics and in their policies. The tech doesn't always do as promised, but in a way that is beside the point. The violence and discrimination of these policies are there by design. Border externalization practices have not started with technology like a decade ago. They've been going on for 3 decades and even more. And they're there whether the tech is faulty or not, whether it is deployed or not. Regardless, consequences will be real. As an EU citizen, the automation at the border is the disguise that will keep these systems of discrimination out of sight. It will make you forget that these so-called problems are actual people, just like us. In countries of origin and of transit, like the ones that I mentioned, the pretense won't even be there. Violence and discrimination will be just there in plain sight, will be sweet, will be irrational, will be conducted by others, will be outsourced. The people at the helm of Fortress Europe, and I know that President von der Leyen is about to speak not too far from this room, they will sell the story of the protection of European citizens and sometimes even of migrants that are victims of smuggling and human traffickers. Fortress Europe evokes danger, fear, and then it provides solution. This is where the language of technology comes in handy, provides a veneer of innovation, of neutrality, of precision. It serves to conceal these systems of violence and discrimination that are embedded in the European Union's racist migration policies. So technology is in the end a distraction, so don't look away.